Hello, my name is Julin Proleiko. I'm a national master from the state of Missouri, and today we're going to do another episode of Chess Openings Explained. Tonight's subject will be the Four Knights Ruy Lopez, or Four Knights Spanish, which starts after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, or bishop e5, or various other move orders that lead to this position. Now, the first thing that we have to recognize the differences between the Four Knights Ruy Lopez and the regular Ruy Lopez, and one major difference is that white can no longer play c3 and d4, so he's either going to have to settle on something inferior like d4 immediately, or go for some other plan. Now, I'll start in order of like the least common moves and we'll work our way towards the most critical lines, and then we'll look at some games. So to begin with, I'll ask our live studio audience, what would you do here with the black pieces? All right. So black in this position wants to develop his pieces, control the center, and castle like he does in all major openings. The question here is, how do you want to do that? So do you want to develop your bishop on f8? Do you want to play d6? Do you want to put your bishop on c5, b4, or d6? Any of these squares, how do you want to develop, and why? The why is the most interesting part. Let's say I were to play, so the difference between, okay, let's start with the regular Ruy Lopez. So if I were to play bishop b5 here, and then a6, if I play bishop c6, dc6, knight e5, what would black play? Queen d4, right. So queen d4 is a double attack on the knight and the pawn on e4, and black is slightly better due to his bishop pair and better development. So white would have to go back, you would take on e4, and this position in practice has been shown to be good for black. So white can't just take the pawn on e5 after a6, but let's look at the position after knight f3, knight c3, a6. So what could the potential differences here be? So why is a6 maybe less playable now than it was in the previous position? Yes?
Because it has several pieces guarding it.
Right, so these two pieces are have been inserted into the position, right? So the knight was on b1 and the knight on f6 was on g8, which means that at the very least this knight will be guarding the pawn on e4 against the queen. So in our variation, bishop c6, dc, knight takes e5. Queen d4 now would be a huge mistake because the knight can just come back to f3, and since the pawn is guarded by the knight, white can just castle next move. So white would be just much better, clearly better, if not like winning.
It would be much more defensive taking out the pieces.
Right. So in this position, a6 is not as good because, yeah, knight e5, queen d4 is less playable, but there is a move here that black can play. So if you are black in this position, what would you maybe try to play using the same themes as in the exchange Ruy Lopez? Knight e4, and if I play knight e4? Then queen d4. Right. And so this is the same tactic, right? I'm attacking two knights and you can't defend both of them. The problem here is that white is clearly better after just castling. In the words of Tal, Tal would sacrifice like a lot of his pieces, right? He'd like leave all of his pieces hanging. You can only take one of them at a time. So even though both of my knights are hanging, you can only take one of them. And whichever one you choose, the one on e5 is better because if you take this one, I play rook e1, and your queen and your king on the same file, that always leads to problems, especially because you're losing the rook immediately. So queen e5 is better. If so here d4, and can anybody tell me why queen takes e4 is not playable? Spencer Feingold. Let's go.
queen e2, pinning the queen to the king.
Oh, queen e2 is unfortunately refuted by queen e2, but close.
Almost had it, though.
Almost got it. Yes, rook e1. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, rook. When the queen and the king are in the same file, this is a common theme, common tactic that occurs. This just wins material for white, so black can basically resign here. So that makes queen e4 unplayable, and black would have to play queen f5, and this position is better for white because of his development advantage. So that's why a6 is maybe less desirable in this specific position as opposed to the actual Ruy Lopez, because the insertion of these moves makes it so that you have to take on e4 with your knight and then give up a few tempos in the opening. So a6 is a little bit dubious here. Some other moves, okay, you would think that bishop c5 might be a good move because you're bringing your bishop to the most active diagonal, right? First of all, let's talk about this position. So white puts his bishop on b5, right? Why is bishop c4 maybe not the best move? Yes? Bishop c4. This is a known thing. Yes?
Knight takes pawn.
Yes?
And then knight takes knight.
Uh-huh.
And you get queen d5.
D5. Yes, that's correct. And the reason why this position is slightly better for black is you have a pawn in the center. This position is forced because if you take on d5, you give away the bishop pair for free. So when you reach a position like this, black has already established a pawn in the center of the board. The bishop on e4 isn't very well placed, and black's already ready to castle and bring his bishop out. Well, white can castle next move. However, his bishop, you still have to play d3. I mean, it's not trapped, but you still have to play d3 or something and get it out. So black has some like small development lead and more control over the center squares. So knowing that this idea exists, right? And it's important to point out that in this position, after knight e4, bishop f7 isn't very good for white because after I take and take, once again, black has the bishop pair. Bishop e7, I believe, is the best move here, although there's nothing wrong with d5 and king g8. This position is also just good for black. Two bishops in the center. The fact that you have, I mean, you've kind of castled anyway, right? So you solve the problem with your rook on h8 and you're just better, and I think bishop e7 is more precise anyway. Just stopping that and you get to play d5. So knowing that that exists, what could be the potential problem with bishop c5 in this position? Yeah. So if knight takes pawn now, then knight takes knight. d4. It's important to note, once again, that if black does this kind of thing, king f2, knight d4, white is just clearly better after d4. I mean, two bishops for free. So, but knight e5, d4, bishop d6, f4. So if you were to take right now, bishop e5, castles, castles, and bishop d3, this position is just equal. But white can play d4 here, sorry, f4, with the point that now if I take back, I'm once again forking your pieces. You move your knight away, and then I play another fork.
This is the line that I told you to go.
What, this line? No, we'll go over that line later. Yeah, we'll go over the fake Halloween gambit recommended by Mario Roper in a second. Bishop b4, takes, a3, and this position after bishop a5 is also approximately equal. Yes? In this position, I don't know, was this too fast? The knight has to go back to c6. I mean, the knight is the best placed on c6 because it's controlling d4. After e5, this is another fork, right? So black has to respond to this. You want to keep your bishop. You don't over your knight. Because if I take your bishop, right, I get two bishops, which is an advantage. And also, this structure isn't good for black. Any questions so far? Everything good? Queen e7? Right, okay. So queen e7 here. The problem is that I just castle, right? And I assume you want to play this trick, but it doesn't work because I take this guy. and queen takes. I have 2 bishops, and once again, I'm gonna. I think it's there's too many problems you have to solve here.
Yeah.
So this position is just good for white. Yeah, knight d4. The point is, okay, everybody in the class sees why this is a bad move, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
Yes. All right.
No, I don't.
Somebody in the back. Do you what's the refutation of queen d4? I'll give you a hint. These pieces are lined up. Correct. And the queen cannot move because it's pinned to the king, so white loses his queen, which is why I have to. I mean, I can probably take either one of these pieces. Honestly, both should lead to an advantage, but I think the taking d6 should just be winning. I can check the computer. Okay, 0.6 isn't much. Okay, actually, funny. This is just winning because I have knight e4 and then I take on d6 anyway. So yeah, this is +5. This position is obviously bad if you don't do something immediate, because if white's allowed to complete development before black is, then he'll have 2 advantages: the bishop pair and time. So here black should move his bishop away to b4, ef6, queen f6, a3, because if you were to just castle here, then your d4 pawn is hanging. So you want to kick the bishop away, and this position is very unclear, but computer shows approximate equality. So that's why maybe taking on e5 immediately isn't correct, but it is an idea. So here white should just castle, and then if black castles, now it's a different story. Knight e5 is very strong. Well, not okay. It's the best move in the position. I'm going, but first let's talk about d6. So after bishop c5 castles, black doesn't have to play castles, right? He can play d6 with the idea of stopping our threat of knight e5, because if you were to play knight e5 now, I would just recapture with my pawn. So what could the potential problem of d6 be? Yeah, the initial disadvantage is that black's knight's pinned, and actually that's very important. It's very important that this move right now, here today, this minute, the knight is pinned, because there's something you can do. So if black were to, if you were to play some pass move like a3, and black castles, black is fine. In fact, I would prefer black because the bishop on c5 is probably better than the bishop on b5. The reason why black is not better here is white has a concrete trick. So after d6, white can play d4. Now you would think I have 1, 2, 3 attackers on the d4 square, and I have 1, 2 defenders. But that isn't actually true, because the knight on c6 isn't actually defending the d4 pawn. So e takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop d7, knight f5 is a possibility. But this type of structure generally is slightly better for white, because you have a tiny bit more space. Now the question is, does black's activity compensate him for having this slight disadvantage in space? Here white translates that into being able to play knight f5. If my pawn were on e3, I wouldn't be able to play knight f5. The bishop would just take my knight. So castles, bishop g5, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, and white has a slight advantage due to his bishop pair. Although his structure has become weakened because he has doubled pawns and the pawn on f5 isn't very strong. Yeah. The line play could continue knight d4, bishop d3, d5, bishop f6, queen f6, knight d5, queen g5, knight c7, rook a d8. This is all computer nonsense. You can look this up at home or anywhere else if you care to. So, but the point is here white is slightly better, yes? But anyway, continue on, moving rapidly on. Let's see. Yeah, so bishop c5 is slightly inferior of a move to the move, let's say bishop d6 even. So bishop d6 is kind of a weird move, right? It's interesting. So what is a disadvantage of playing bishop d6? Can anybody tell me the obvious thing? Yes?
Block the pawn.
It blocks the pawn, which blocks in my bishop, which means that the bishop on c8 won't be moving for a while. But the thing is, it's really hard for white to take advantage of this. And in the normal Ruy Lopez, the way you would take advantage of somebody playing bishop d6 is by establishing a pawn on d4. Unfortunately, here that's not exactly possible because black has an e5 pawn. And the fact that a knight on c3 is really important. So white would play c3 in d4, and the bishop on d6 would look really silly. Now, in this position, if you were to play d4, black could just take it, and there's not really a threat of e5 yet. So like knight takes, like I could castle, and once again e5 would fail to the same trick that we mentioned before. So that's not really an issue here. Black has to solve his problems, but you can't immediately take advantage of the bishop being on d6. The best move here is d3, a6, bishop a4, bishop c4 are also bishop c4 is also playable. Bishop a4 is slightly better because after bishop a4 is slightly better because after bishop c4 the black can just play knight a5 and chase this guy down immediately. So bishop a4, h6. H6 is played to prevent bishop g5, but castling immediately is also fine. Bishop g5 is well met by b5 and bishop e7. This position is also approximately equal, although I would prefer to be white. Knight a5 in this position after castles bishop g5, if you were to chase after my bishop here, white would be slightly better after knight d5, bishop e7, takes. And I have slightly better pieces than you. The bishop on c8 still needs to be developed. And by the way, the structure that's going to occur because I'm losing the bishop pair is actually, even though the pawns are doubled, they're stronger than their colleagues. Like castles takes. So the pawn is improved from a2 to b3 because it's going towards the center. And pawns that are on the b file, I love this thing that Yasser told me when I was very low rated. I mean, pawns that are on the b file, right? They can move in 3 directions. Pawns on the a file can only move in 2 directions. It's like so obvious when you think about it, but the reason why these pawns might be bad is because the pawn on b2 can't move. But overall, you get the file, and if you can make the pawn on b4 or b3 useful and fix your opponent's structure, then it could be an advantage. Anyway, white is slightly better here. Black shouldn't chase after the bishop in this position. He should instead just play b5 and after bishop g5, he should play b5, bishop b3, and bishop e7, breaking the pin. So let's move on to h6, a3. So a3 is obviously played to prevent b5 and knight a5 winning the bishop on b3. So b5 anyway, bishop b3, bishop b7, and I would say this position is maybe very slightly better for white, just because black's pieces are a little funny, like they're not the best place. The bishop on b7 is striking against this wall on d3 and e4, and the bishop on d6 is staring on e5, but black has ideas of knight d4, castling, and he has no real weaknesses as far as structure is concerned. So this is also a line that's very playable for black, and if you would prefer to play bishop d6 over bishop c5, I would not blame you. So bishop c5 was our inferior move to bishop d6. So let's move on to one of the main lines actually, which is bishop b4. Now this was the old main line, and the one that I was actually taught. The line would go like this: castles, d3, d6, bishop g5, and here So far, both sides have played symmetrically, right? The whole board is symmetrical. But the problem for black is that if he continues playing in this style, then he could very well like lose in the next 2 moves, because bishop g4 would lose immediately to knight d5, because I'm attacking the f6 knight, right, with these two. So you're going to get double pawns, but if you continue the same way and you're getting double pawns, my one tempo matters, because I'm attacking b4 and f6, and this comes with check. So here, I think the way this goes is, let's see. Actually, let's cheat. Yeah, sorry. Bishop f6, and if queen f6, then knight d5 wins immediately, because b4 is hanging right here. Now, if you were to play g takes here, then the structural defect is noticeable. You can't keep this pin because of g4. This type of position is very good for white because the bishop on g6 has no squares. And so you can't really play symmetrically. You have to do something else. And what I was told is that black is completely fine in this position after bishop c3, bc3, queen e7, rook e1, defending, or actually I was told that c4 was the move here, which is incorrect. But okay, I was told that c4 should be played, knight d8, c3, trying to bring the bishop back, knight e6, and black is fine, because I've kicked the bishop away from the h4 to d8 diagonal, because bishop h4 leaves the f4 square tender, so probably like bishop e3 is best. And black has no bad pieces, and that's true for this position. This position is fine for black. Like this position is like equal, it's fine, right? But but instead they realize that this position here, after rook e1, d4, rook e1, knight d8, which is the maneuver that everybody's taught, put your knight on e6, it controls the f4 square. White has this move d4, which was the point of rook e1. Rook e1 defends the e4 pawn, and after knight e6, white has a very nice move, bishop c1, c5, and bishop f1, and remains slightly better out of the opening, which is weird because this opening doesn't really have a good reputation for keeping the advantage that white has. So, I mean, this position is slightly better for white. We'll discuss that later, but let's look at alternatives. So black doesn't have to play this way. Black can play bishop b4, d3, castles, and after d3, he can play bishop, instead of bishop c3, he can just play d6. Then white plays bishop g5, and here, instead of bishop c3, black could just play knight e7. And this has very good equalizing chances, but unfortunately, I think I found an advantage for white after bishop f6, gf6, d4, c6, bishop d3, knight g6, knight e2, king h8, c3. And the problem is black has a bad structure, and he's not lost by any means, and he has the 2 bishops to compensate for a structural defect. But I think that in this specific position, the inability to play f5 will matter at some point. So white has the better chances here because he controls more squares. Any questions about anything that I just said?
The idea of king h8.
King h8? Oh yeah, so in this position, the reason why the king goes to h8 is you have the open g file, right? And the only way that your rook makes any sense is if it goes there. So you put your rook on g8, and then your rook makes a lot of sense. In chess, you want your pieces to see, right? Like imagine at the start of the game, you know, they're like blind children. You want to help them see. So you put them on, you know, you give them all the opportunities to see everything. And the rook on g8, I mean, it just sees everything. So that's why you put your king on h8. Unfortunately, I think the fact that white has control of the center here, I mean, like, black isn't lost. He's only like slightly worse. But I think the central control and the better structure gives him the better game. Sorry. So, but I mean, to be fair, black has 2 bishops. He has the G file and also like good chances for counterplay. So that is an alternative for black. Oh, hold on. I forgot to mention Mario's line. Let's go even further back. In this position, black can play G6, but here there's the Pseudo-Halloween gambit, which is knight e5, knight e5, d4. I'm only mentioning this because Halloween is like coming up. Yeah, okay. But this position is, I mean, better for black because you're down a piece. Unclear. You can look it up. Not interesting. Bishop b4. Castles d3, d6. Instead of playing like that, it's very possible at any moment black could play bishop c3, bc3, and instead of playing queen e7, he could just play knight e7. And here, white would be slightly better after knight h4, c6, and bishop a4. I keep the bishop pair, and I'm preventing the knight from coming to g6 because I'll play knight f5. So I'm negating, or rather, I'm controlling the f5 square more. So this position is very slightly better for white. Bishop d7, b1, a6, bishop a4. Bishop c6 is obviously nothing because you give your bishop away for nothing. So this is equal. b5, bishop b3. I mean, I have to save my bishop, right? h6, bishop h4, and this position is also very slightly better for white because I have 2 bishops. Although that is certainly a very solid alternative for black, and if any black player wants to play it, then that's also totally fine. It doesn't lose by force. So let's move on to the main variation, which is here. Actually, sorry. This is like the starting position. We'll look at some games here. White is slightly better, but now we'll reach the real main lines, which start after the very interesting knight d4. So you look at this move and you're like, well, I mean, white's play has been so timid, right? He brings his knights out. He controlled the center. He brought both his knights out. Then he put his bishop on b5. The black can actually afford to just play knight d4 because knight e5 is not very good. Because, yeah, you can put immediate pressure on the knight and take on e4. And, I mean, black's going to have the bishop pair and is already, like, slightly better. So you can see here. So, yeah, you can't take the pawn on e5 immediately. So the question is, where do you move your bishop? Both obvious moves are very interesting, which is bishop a4 and bishop c4. The other moves aren't so interesting. So if you go back to e2, then black is obviously just fine after taking on e2 and playing d6. Bishop pair. The best Philidor that's ever occurred ever. Castles isn't very good because you take on b5 and then you play c6 and d6. d4, queen c7. Once again, this is the greatest Philidor opening ever. Black is for choice. Even, I mean, that's subjective, I guess. It's equal, but I would rather be black. Yeah, so let's move on to the 2 critical continuations. We'll talk about bishop c4 first because it's less critical. Now, white could be, that's right. Black could be very solid here and just play knight f3, I believe. I think this is fine, yeah. Just takes and then bishop c5, and this position is completely equal. This is very solid, but if black wants to play like in a more interesting manner with bishop c5, just leaving the pawn sit on e5, but continuing to develop, then you get some very interesting positions because knight e5, black is forced to play queen e7. Castless doesn't make any sense because then you just lost a pawn for nothing. You need to attack the knight on e5. If the knight goes away, then you play d5. Striking at the center, a pawn can't take because of the rules of chess. So bishop takes. which could be a potential advantage of putting your bishop on c4. Although d5 wouldn't be possible if the bishop were on a4. Bishop g4, and yeah, here black is going to make sure that white has structural damage done to his position. These pawns will be weak, and white has a sleeping queenside. Everybody over there is blind, and castling kingside isn't very appealing because all of black's pieces are going to be coming in. Sorry. So here you have to play d3 in order to maybe get your king to the queenside. Castle's queenside is the best move. Bishop e3 here is playable. Knight d5, and this line that was played in the database many times by very strong players, actually. Like there's Matlev against Rajabov, and Karyakin, and Wei Yi against Adams. These are all like top 10, top 15 players in the world. They've all played this line, and the results would indicate out of 16 games that the position is good for black. But my analysis shows something different, and the computers here you can see for yourself. Rook d5, ed, bishop. Rook e8, bishop f3 here, gf. This is also just good for white because you keep your pawn and you get to castle probably. So, yep. But I'm sorry, you don't keep your pawn. You just up the exchange for some mild compensation. Anyway, the main line in the database here was rook e8. Since the strong players played it, that's what we look at. But it seems to me that white is just better after castles, which is really hard to play. But knight f3, gf, bishop h3, and after rook e1, bishop e3, f4 is sorry. So this position, bishop e3, f4 is just winning. If queen h4, white is better after king h1. So anyway, the games usually continued c3, and this position is approximately equal after knight f3 gf because they found some perpetual. Maybe it's some forced draw line, I don't know. So castle, this is interesting, but probably best here is just after d3 to play c6. And yeah, if bishop e3, then you can put more pressure on e5, and this is, white might have some slight advantage, but black should be fine. Instead of this, of course, black objectively should probably play knight f3 and bishop c5, the solid approach, but that was the interesting line. So let's continue with bishop a4, which is more critical. Now we get into a whole bunch of crazy variations because all the variations are mixed together. The most common move is bishop a4, bishop c5. A lot of games that I was looking at went bishop a4, c6. Let's talk about that first. The point that after knight e5, you have both d6 here and d5. D5 is supposedly less critical, but it has higher level games, so let's look at d6 first. So knight f3, bishop g4, d3, d5, ed, knight d5. Does anybody have any questions about any moves that were played? Is all of this very clear, or? All right, moving on. ed, knight d. Have to recapture your pawn. Castles, knight c3, bc, knight f3, gf, bishop e6. Black has a lot of compensation for the pawn he has sacrificed, obviously, because white has structural defects on the queen side, but the very obvious ones on the king side. So black stands fine here. After bishop e3, bishop d6, f4, queen f6, bishop e6, fe, queen h5. The line. This is all computer analysis, but this is approximately equal. So d6 is very playable and very interesting, but a lot of top players were trying to play d5 here, where you get a very imbalanced position after d3, bishop d6, attacking the knight on e5. If the knight moves to f3, then bishop g4 is very strong, like in every other position. But white has f4. So now that the bishop doesn't really have a purpose, it's not going to take on e5 anymore. It moves to c5, preventing white from castling, because there would be some nasty discoveries. So in this position, e d5 castles, ignoring the pawn on d5 because you can't capture with the pawn and you really want to capture with the pawn. Taking with the knight just wastes time. So castles, dc6, bc6, h3, and in this position, white has a very hard time castling kingside, and his development is very poor. So he has to try to get his king to safety on the queen side. We'll take a look at some high-level games here later. So this is also very interesting. Most people, as I said before, play bishop c5 here. The point that after knight e5, you have castles. Queen e7 here is not very good because of knight d3, and b5 is the best move here. Knight e4 castles is better for white because once again, tactics due to the queen and the king being on the same file are very visible here, and the white's slight lead in development should give him an advantage. Anyway, so castles is best. Knight d3. Bishop b6 is the only good move because you need to keep your bishop on this side of the board aimed at the king in his future hiding spot. So e5, attacking the knight. Knight goes back to e8. Knight d5. White really wants to get rid of the bishop on b6, which could potentially be a monster. d6, knight e3. The knight transfers to this square because you need to be able to retrieve your bishop from a4 and have your pieces be a little bit more harmonious. And anyway, c5 is played to reinforce the knight and potentially give more squares to the other pieces and play c4 later. c3, knight f5, queen h5 is my recommended novelty. Bishop c2 is also played here. This position is very unclear and there's lots of variations to be discussed. I highly recommend doing more analysis on this specific position here because I mean it's a lot of fun just to look at the variations. I would start with queen h5 because I mean there's this line, queen h5, knight e3, and knight b4 coming to d5, and it would seem to me that white has a slight advantage, but I'm not going to claim that to be true or false yet, and not enough analysis has been done. So if any theoreticians want to look at this position, they can. I mean, there's no reason to, I guess, but for fun. This is an interesting line to go over. Anyway, let's look at some games. So remember our original tabia from the bishop b4 line. So bishop b4. So black is Anatoly Karpov, which everybody in this room should have at least heard of, who is a world champion and one of the strongest chess players in history. So he's playing the black piece against Peter Svidler, who is also a very strong chess player. One of the strongest players in Russia right now, and probably top 15. He's definitely in the top 20. He's always there, always above like 2750. Anyway, so d3, bishop c3, bc3. So Karpov is playing like everybody was taught. Everybody's taught to take the knight on c3, play queen e7, and then put their knight on d8. This is like the classic maneuver. But unfortunately for him, I mean, it's not good against every setup that white has, and I don't think it's very good here. Because d4, knight e6, bishop c1, c5, bishop f1. And it actually surprises me quite a bit that this position has been seen so much in Grandmaster practice, because it's so easy to understand the plans for white. White can play on both sides of the board. he has 2 bishops, and all of his pieces make sense. Like the pawns on c3 and d4, right? They reinforce each other. The double pawns is maybe like a slight concession. I have the choice of playing d5 whenever I want. I have central space, and I can play on the king side with maybe g3, knight h4, and f4, and maybe get some kind of attack going. Anyway, the game continued rook d8, g3. As I said, so white wants to play, actually it's not clear where white wants to play yet, but the bishop could be improved. Actually g2 isn't a very good square, but white wants to move his pawns towards his opponent's king. And white can play on both sides of the board, and I mean black is just kind of sitting back and waiting to see what happens. Rook b8 was played. Rook b8 was played to gain some space with b5. White prevents that with a4. Knight f8, putting additional protection on e5. I mean, there's not a lot to recommend for black. Like, there's no active moves that you can really come up with that are any good. So black has to resort to shuffling his pieces around while white actually comes up with like real plans. So knight h4, potentially aiming at f5, but really the knight is remaneuvering itself to g2 and possibly e3, where later it'll become more useful. So bishop g4, f3. This was in white's plan anyway. He's going to push his pawns on the king side. Bishop d7, knight g2, queen e8, which is a very dubious move. Why is queen e8 a bad or dubious move? Can anybody find the best move for white? What did queen e8 do? What was the queen on e7 doing that the queen on e8 is no longer doing? Something that that you mentioned in the opening.
I don't remember.
Yes?
Well, the knight isn't protected anymore by 2 pieces.
That is correct. And the reason why that's important is after bishop g5, black cannot afford to have his structure damaged like this. So he has to bring his queen back to protect his knight. So you've gained an extra tempo by putting your bishop on g5. You've attacked the knight. This is a horrible structure to have because your opponent might just checkmate you.
Mm-hmm.
So bishop g5, queen e6, knight e3. Sorry, did you raise your hand or? Oh, my eyes. Bad eyes. Bad everything. Anyway, h6, bishop c4, and here white is completely winning because if you go back to defend your knight, by the way, it was better for black just to admit that he played a mistake. It's really hard psychologically to do this, but when your opponent plays a move like bishop g5 to just go back to e7, but it's really like the best thing to do in the position. He didn't have anything better than this. Queen e6 was just kind of saying, oh yeah, I saw bishop g5, this was my idea anyway. But yeah, queen e6 is unfortunate because now after knight e3, h6 is wrong as bishop c4 attacks the queen. If the queen were to go back to e7, then when knight d5 comes, not only do I damage your structure, but I'm winning loads of material. If you take back, then this is a fork, winning a queen. And if you go to e6, then this is a discovery, winning your queen. So the queen has to the queen has to go to h3, but unfortunately, the end is near. Bishop f6, gf, f4, cd4 was played in the game. It doesn't matter. Everything loses. Can somebody tell me how many squares the queen has? You can use pen and paper at home. How many squares can the queen move to without getting taken? This could be a trick question. Yes?
0?
That is correct. So if you were to attack the queen, you would win the queen. So how do you attack the queen? E oh, sorry. Yes, by.
No, were you gonna call somebody else?
No. You can go. So bishop, yeah, the bishop can go back to f1, but unfortunately, there's a catch. The queen now has the e6 square, right? So knowing that the queen can go back after your bishop moves, right? Is there something you can do to prevent the queen from going backwards?
By putting the bishop to e6.
If you put the bishop on e6, the queen will go to e6, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Bump the pawn.
Oh, the pawn.
The pawn?
G3 or G3 to G4.
Unfortunately, I think. Oh, so the problem with that is you're giving the queen another square, right? So you're giving the queen the h4 square, but you have the right idea. Roll and execution. Yes.
I thought of the black bishop coming down to protect the black queen. What's that on?
H3. The problem here is that yeah, the black bishop will be able to protect the queen, but the queen is more valuable than the the theoretical, so the hypothetical bishop that's arriving on f1. So when the bishop does arrive on f1, it doesn't matter if your bishop protects it, because obviously a queen is worth more than the bishop. But yeah, so the question is, how can I play bishop f1, right, without letting the queen come back to the game?
How about F5?
That is correct. F5, and the game is basically over, because I mean the rest of the game continued. Takes, bishop went back to f1. The queen is trapped, right? I mean it has no squares. If you go to g4, I take. Go to h5, I take. It's the worst arrow ever. I take. Go to h4, I take. Here, I take. Go to g2, I take. Every square is covered. So all I have to do is take the queen, right? So yeah, the game continued here. Bishop f5, bishop h3, takes. Now, how do you be as precise as possible? What would you play with white? Yes? Anyway, you had a thought? Queen h5 is correct, because it attacks the bishop and the pawn on h6. Yes. So bishop e6, queen h6, d5. Now the rook takes on e3, because I mean it's better not to allow counterplay. If you like, black's pawn on e3 could potentially be very strong, right? If I play d4 and it's reinforced, the structure potentially could be strong. It's all nonsense. Like, white is winning in every variation. You could play almost any move here, like any reasonable move, and you would win. But you want to finish the game as cleanly as possible, because your opponent is, you know, a current or ex-world champion. I don't know what year this game was played. 2003. Okay, so ex-world champion, right? So ex-world champion Anatoly Karpov, one of the strongest players in chess history. Maybe if you make some inaccuracies, he'll get out. So Peter Svidler, very strong, obviously didn't let that happen. Rook e3, d4, queen f6. So you want to take away as many defenders away from. You want to take the defenders away from the king with queen f6. It's easier to checkmate. Knight h7, queen goes back to h6. Took the pawn, goes back to its ideal square. Rook c8, rook e4, rook c3, rook e5. And after rook c6, rook g5, black resigned. Unfortunately, I think that's all I have time for. Thank you very much. This was Julin Proleiko, my coverage of the 4-9 Spanish.